The idea of fascia release, I'm a myofascia release practitioner, and the idea of fascia release, the words that we use for it, they do interest me. When we talk about fascia release, what is it that we are releasing? What is it that we are letting go of? So, if I'm very honest, when I first became a myofascial release practitioner, I had ideas that when I was putting my hands on people, I was changing their collagen and I was changing the real makeup of their fascia. That's not very accurate. Well, first of all, I don't think I am changing anything when I am doing my fascia release, and I am certainly not releasing their fascia. I still like the word release because I do think that there is a release of something a little bit more ethereal, something a bit more deep to the essence of why there is a holding that is perhaps not necessary. That holding can be in many layers of the being, not necessarily just that there is a restriction in the tissue, physical restriction in the tissue, but that that is affected by the nervous system and that that affects the nervous system, touching also obviously into the emotion. So whether it is the emotion that affects the holding or the holding that affects the emotion. So in that intention to not get too hold on the physical makeup of fascia being where the dehydration is, but changing the patterning that creates that restriction, that dehydration of those particular tissues in which we could say there is a fascial restriction is perhaps much more potent and much more necessary. Bringing in the developmental patterns for me touches on that repatterning of those innate first experiences with movement, the first of which were in utero. So the initial movement that we perhaps were able to do was an expansion and contraction, which could perhaps be experimented or seen as we were more of a sort of unicellular or maybe multicellular organism, but we had not started to specialize. Our movement was more one of finding the expansion and finding the contraction. And we did that in utero, and we also have that in our evolutionary development. So when we were unicellular organisms floating in the sea, that was more the kind of movement that we were then exploring. An expansion and a contraction, or perhaps a pull and a push. There was not really a reach yet. It was only a push and a pull. As we start to grow limbs, we then start to be able to explore with the reach and to start to communicate, especially through our upper limb, to communicate with that other, with the you, the other. And we can start to reach. And that comes from in an emotional level. In a developmental movement, we bring the reach from having explored the push, and that reach allows us to propel ourselves through space. When we start to combine the push with the pull with the reach, and then the push with the pull with the reach, we propel. We experience that in our first year of life with crawling, and with the baby starting to try to reach for a toy or try to reach for the light or whatever it is that they are trying to reach for. And that initial experiencing of reach is going to have a lot of influence in the way that we then are able to go and crawl, which will have a lot of influence in the way that we then are going to develop gait. So we could actually break everything down to the movements of push, reach, and pull.